page is blacked out, Congressman, and I want to ask you about that because you basically said, look, this has to be declassified in order for the American people to understand. Tell us why.
Well, it's kind of like Groundhog Day. If you remember a few weeks ago when I was in New York and on your show, we were talking about the heavy redactions that were done to the House Intelligence Committee's report that actually had the information on what Russia was doing in the election. However, it had been totally redacted, so the public couldn't see it, while in the meantime, the media was essentially attacking the Republicans' work. Well, now here you have another situation where, with the FISA that we fought so hard to make sure the public has understood, that Clinton paid for dirt was used to get a warrant to spy on an American citizen using our secret counterintelligence capabilities in this country. So now, if I can't see it, but you held it up, I think roughly 70–75% of that FISA that came out last week, that look, and we're glad this came out for the public to see, but at the same time, there's so much that's redacted, Maria. And yeah. If you notice what the left and the mainstream media said, because once we were exonerated once this came out, because we had put out a memo where we had said that this dossier or the dirt was used to get a FISA warrant. We were exonerated last weekend. But now, if you look at what they were saying, they said, oh, but the really juicy stuff, it's actually the really stuff that proves collusion and how bad Carter Page really was and how they were colluding with the Russians, that's what's redacted. Well, that was kind of the news for 48 hours. But once the left and the media found out that the House Republicans on the Intelligence Committee had asked back in June for the president to declassify up to 20 pages, you hear crickets. You hear nothing. You don't hear them. They don't want that unredacted. They don't want transparency for the American people. So the president has the letter from us. I think his lawyers are looking at this to see if they can declassify it sooner rather than later. But the sooner this comes out, the better off we all are, because what I've said is what's left that's redacted, the American people really need to know what's underneath there.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask you about, because I read the op-ed this weekend with you in the Wall Street Journal, and it's titled Devin Nunes, Washington's Public Enemy #1. And in it you say, if people think using the Clinton dirt to get a FISA is bad, what else that's in that application is even worse. And you identify a specific number of pages in the letter you sent to President Trump that need to be redacted. Can you tell us anything about what could possibly be even worse than using an unverified piece of nonsense to actually get a warrant to spy on an American citizen?
Well, and therein lies the problem, right? So the mainstream media and the left, they can run out and say, well, what's really bad in there is the stuff that the public can't see. It's redacted. But the reality is that's not the case. Those of us who have been providing oversight over this issue, we've had several of our members who have been painstakingly going through it piece by piece, and we are quite confident that once the American people see these 20 pages, at least for those that will get real reporting on this issue, they will be shocked by what's in that FISA application.
Has the president read the unredacted portions?
I have no idea what the president has or has not read. Okay. All I know is that we sent him a letter back in June asking him to declassify those 20 pages or more. I mean, if they can declassify, the more the better. But I think the bulk of what we would like to see are 20 pages in the last FISA that was signed by the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
You know, it seems that the midterm elections become that much more important. The stakes are so high on these midterm elections. We wouldn't know any of this stuff without your committee and your colleagues at Judiciary and Oversight. We wouldn't know half of the stuff that took place in the 2016 elections. What happens if the House flips and the Democrats take the majority in the House come the midterm elections?
Well, that is what I said in the Wall Street Journal interview. Yeah, the Wall Street Journal interview over the weekend, I stated that I am quite confident, because I've seen this game played many times before. There's a stall game going on at DOJ and FBI. They're trying to stall as much as they can, hoping and betting that Republicans would lose the House in the fall. And if that happens, then it shuts down everything. Rod Rosenstein will not be held in contempt. FBI will not be held accountable. All these investigations will shut down. Everything will be buried. And you'll be left with media narratives saying, oh, what the public can't read, what you really can't read, what's blacked out, that's the really bad stuff against Carter Page and the Republicans and the Trump campaign. That's why the sooner the president declassifies this, the better. And I think the American people need to understand how important it's going to be to get out and vote in this election.
Well, tell us where your investigation stands right now. Is Rod Rosenstein performing? Do you think his leadership is encouraging them to be up front and show us justice?
Well, what I can tell you is that there was a move late last week to begin impeachment. I think there are grounds for impeachment, and we should hold them accountable. I think Congress has given up way too much power. The way I understand it is that the Judiciary Committee and Oversight Committee got commitments on Friday. I think the Speaker also got commitments, from what I understand, that documents will be provided. So we're short a few documents. We are supposed to see those this week. But in addition to that, interviews/depositions will begin over August. So we will have members of Congress that will be flying back to Washington during August to conduct interviews with very important witnesses that need to be interviewed as it relates to getting to the bottom of this Russiagate scandal.
Mr. Chairman, let me switch gears real quick and ask you about what's going on with Twitter and shadow banning. The president tweeted about it. Do you think social media is censoring conservative views and conservative speakers?
Yeah, you know what? I had no idea what shadow banning even was.
Right.
I had absolutely no clue. I had so for several months, people have been contacting me saying that, hey, I tried to find you on Twitter. I couldn't find your account. Why is that? And then you had a report that came out where, in fact, there were 4 people in the House of Representatives, and the only 4 politicians in the country, the elected officials that were being, quote unquote, well, they don't call it shadow banning, but effectively we were getting caught up in some type of trap to where people couldn't see our Twitter feed. That was Mr. Gates, Mr. Meadows, Mr. Jordan, and myself.
Okay.
So I don't know what Twitter's up to. It sure looks to me like they're censoring people, and they ought to stop it. And we're looking at any legal remedies that we can go through.
August 8th, 2016. And I'll preface it by saying this for context. Ms. Page said, not ever going to become president, right? Right?
No, he's not. We'll stop it.
Repeat that again.
No, he's not. We'll stop it.
August 15th, 2016.
I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40.
That was Republican Congressman Darrell Issa questioning anti-Trump FBI agent Peter Strzok a couple of weeks ago during a joint House committee hearing last month. Meanwhile, newly released emails are showing that Strzok wanted to keep his security clearance and other FBI powers as he transitioned away from the FBI and to the Robert Mueller Russia investigation. Congressman Darrell Issa joins me right now to talk more about that. He is a member of the House Oversight, Judiciary, and Foreign Affairs Committees. And, Congressman, it is always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for teeing it up with the fact that the more we know about Peter Strzok, the more we need to know more.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to ask you. I mean, I want to ask you where your investigation stands right now. But first, what about this idea that Peter Strzok did not want to give up his security clearances? A moment ago, I was talking to Congressman Peter King about this revolving door about how security clearances perpetuate top-level corruption in the United States because they're using their security clearances as their bona fides to get a new job, and then they're using that job to actually lash out at President Trump if they don't agree with him.
Well, exactly. And this isn't new. At the end of the Clinton administration, we had people showing up and putting classified documents into their clothes and walking out with one-of-a-kind documents because they still had access. This is a problem. In the case of Peter Strzok, what was interesting was he didn't just want to keep his clearance. He wanted to keep to use a term, special powers, powers that even the Speaker of the House doesn't have, issuing national security letters, meaning doing investigations without the normal protections of a court order, and the ability to declassify documents selectively, meaning to create an environment in which you could leak something and say it isn't classified because you've declassified it. For Mueller, these were special powers that no one understood he had, and Peter brought to the fight, if you will.
So should President Trump be revoking these security clearances for those people who are no longer working in government, like a John Brennan, like Clapper?
Well, there's a principle in classified information, which is need to know. And if you're acting the way Brennan or Clapper, who lied to Congress and admitted it, if you're acting that way, you no longer have a need to know. And for that reason, they shouldn't. And I think the important thing is, if you're a former cabinet officer, you're a former high-ranking official, and you might be called, great. But that's a decision of the president or the current administration. And I think it's extremely important that this not be a guarantee, a right, but rather a privilege of those who continue to volunteer and help America in these difficult times. There are many people, former commandants and so on, who maintain their clearances, and their behavior is such that we want to have them as advisors. But there are clearly exceptions.
Congressman, your committee, the Judiciary Committee, as well as Intel and Oversight, are investigating really what happened during the 2016 election. And I want to ask you where that investigation stands. But first, listen to this. Listen to Jim Clapper, former head of the NSA, on CNN recently, basically admitting that President Obama directed these agencies. Listen to this.
And I'm alluding now to the president's criticism of President Obama for all that he did or didn't do before he left office with respect to the Russian meddling. If it weren't for President Obama, we might not have done the intelligence community assessment that we did that set off a whole sequence of events which are unfolding today, notably Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. President Obama is responsible for that, and it was he who tasked us to do that intelligence community assessment in the first place.
Well, there you go. He just admitted it, that President Obama directed the intelligence agencies to launch these special investigations into possible collusion between Trump and Russia, of where, of course, we have no evidence of. How far up the ladder do you think it goes?
Well, it clearly goes to the top, and this is the problem we had with the last administration was there was this sort of deniability by the attorney generals and by the president, and then later on you discover, no, they were intimately involved. And no question at all, this is an example where President Obama was hoping, in fact, to win the election and use this information against the opposing party. Hillary Clinton didn't win. They got a special prosecutor under essentially false pretenses. If we had known before what we know now, particularly about Peter Strzok and others, there would not have been a special prosecutor. People in good faith called for it based on false information created by the Obama administration.
Well, your investigation right now is looking at that?
We're also calling for you mentioned in an earlier segment, we're also calling for an investigation of Twitter and other social media that appear to be creating algorithms that are clearly biased against conservatives.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because we had House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy on recently, and he wants the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, to testify in front of Congress on these issues of shadow banning, of censorship of social media. Right. Last week, we had the chairman of Intel, Devin Nunes, on this program, and here's what he said. Listen to this.
I don't know what Twitter's up to. It sure looks to me like they're censoring people, and they ought to stop it. And we're looking at any legal remedies that we can go through.
So, Congressman, what are the legal remedies in your view? I mean, you know, if you Googled GOP in California a couple of months ago and you wanted to get the items that were important to the GOP, one of them was Nazism. That was on Google. On Twitter, they have terrible commentators talking about Melania Trump, something Kevin McCarthy lashed out at Twitter about just last week. What's your take on the legal remedies here?
Well, first of all, an example is when Google had that they stood behind this theory that they're a utility and they're not responsible, even though they were giving legitimacy to it and knew it. So one of the challenges is these entities have special benefits, if you will, of being immune from, if you will, the normal responsibility that the rest of the media has. That could be taken away. In the case of Twitter and these others, to be honest, if they're going to politic through algorithm, they could well come under the Federal Election Commission. They could be considered to, in fact, be making an in-kind donation. They could have to register what those dollars are. For right now, what we want to do is we want to get them to admit the truth, which is it doesn't seem logical that when they come up with a new algorithm, it only seems to affect Republican conservatives such as Jim Jordan and the like. And it's the reason that both the Judiciary Committee and the Oversight Committee are trying to schedule on the first day back a hearing with Twitter to give them an opportunity to explain how this anomaly that it only seems to affect conservatives.
By the way, because when you have an algorithm, somebody programs that algorithm. These algorithms don't just come out of air.
Well, exactly, and that's one of the challenges that we face every day is people say, well, it's all being done in a dispassionate way. Well, no, it isn't. You write code, and that code will come up with something. Right. And, you know, if you give the probability one way, conservatives win. If you give it another way, liberals win. If you do it fairly, then you are looking for those Russian or other outsiders without ever affecting, for example, a member of Congress. It's not hard to write an algorithm that says no matter what you see, if it's an elected official, they should not be, in fact, withdrawn. And yet that's exactly what happened to a number of members.
Absolutely. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. We'll be watching. Thanks so much.